Everybody. Welcome. We'll get started in just a second. We're letting everyone in from the waiting room. Um, we noticed a little faux pas in the reminder email about the time for today's session. And so we are hoping everyone realized it's at 9 and not at 10, but I see people are coming. All those Habitat people are coming in, Tim. I can see them. Um, It's always great when you're doing a session with specific organizations and all their colleagues come, and so we're getting a great mix of people. Just a little more time, and then I think I will get started. And Ben, you can also help me handle letting people in from the waiting room when you get to space.
Certainly.
Welcome, Emily. Okay, well, I think I'm just going to go ahead and get started because we all like to be on time. And I want to welcome everyone that's in the Zoom room today. I am Debbie Nelson with Together SC. And I have the honor of hosting and planning a lot of these events that we do for our members, what we're calling our professional development. One of the things that has come out of the last year of spending so much time on Zoom is this series that you're here today to be part of, and that is removing our blinders. I think everyone that's associated with Together SC will know that we have really concentrated a lot of energy over the past year on our Facing Race Together work. This started out at our summit in 2020. And as a result of that, we've done a whole host of things. We do all kinds of work around professional development, but we have also done a good bit of work around our race equity. And so this program, the Removing Our Blinders, has been going on since last fall. It is a monthly call where we get to hear from leaders in our nonprofit community and other leaders in our other community leaders as well about their journeys through race equity. Where are their first experiences with racism? What do they know and how can they explain white privilege? And they're very candid conversations, and we appreciate all of the folks that have participated and been facilitators for these sessions. A number of our Together SC board members have participated. And this month, we have a real special treat in that we have two nonprofit leaders from the York County area who actually participated in one of our Facing Race Together cohorts that we had since last fall. And this was a program that was facilitated by Dr. Heather Hackman, who is an expert in race equity. She spoke at our 2020 summit. I think anyone that heard her cannot forget her. I mean, Heather Hackman's amazing. And after that we invited her to lead a cohort. We had literally 40 of you out there, 40 executive directors from Together SC who attended a 9-month or actually 8-month series with Dr. Hackman on a monthly basis. It was our Race Equity Lens cohort. And this was specifically designed for white leaders. And the reason for that was for all of us to learn together, not put that burden on our Black colleagues, but for us to learn together with Dr. Hackman. The amazing thing that happened is we built all kinds of relationships. We learned a lot in that cohort, but two leaders that were participating raised their hands and said, golly, we actually knew each other before, but we are doing work together as a result of that cohort. And those are our two guests today. We have Anita Case, who is the executive director of Affinity Health Center, which is a community health center in Rock Hill. She has been in her current position as the executive director since 2005, and very actively engaged in work around race equity in her community. The other person that raised his hand was Tim Veeck, who is the executive director of Habitat for Humanity of York County. And he's been in that position since 2010. So these individuals participated with Dr. Hackman, found that there may be some alignment. And today we're going to hear about their experiences in the cohort, but also their experiences in their community and what they are doing today. So with that brief introduction, there's so much more I could share about both of them. I'm going to turn it over to Anita to first tell us a little bit more about herself and then to share her journey, which we all know is a journey in race equity, and where she is on that journey, and tell us some stories. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Anita, to kick this off.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here this morning. It's nice to see some familiar faces, some old friends, one of my board members. So glad to have you all. So I'm Anita Case. I've been with Affinity Health Center for 15 years as executive director, and we provide health care for uninsured and underinsured low income individuals, primarily in York County. And we started as an HIV organization about 20 years ago and converted to a community health center about 6 years ago. So it has been a fun adventure for the last 15 years. And Together SC has been a really important part of our journey and providing professional development opportunities. So I'm real excited to be with you today. Debbie asked us to talk just a little bit about our journey on this race equity journey. And, I was thinking back, and I think the first time that I really learned about racism and kind of white advantage and implicit bias was in school when I was working on my social work degree, and I took a class that really focused on racism. And I remember being just really impacted by things that it had never occurred to me as a white person, things that I was just oblivious to. And when I started my current role as executive director, I went in and I was thinking, let's do this race work together. And this was about 15 years ago because we had a pretty diverse staff at the time. And I, I can look back now and say I thought I was ready to do the work with my organization then, and I really wasn't. And I think it overwhelmed me, and I did not do it justice. So I fast forward to now. A couple of years ago at the Together SC Summit, they were starting to focus on race equity, and I participated in some conversations and a session where I learned about the Racial Equity Institute. And I was really interested in participating in that. I mean, the folks I talked to who had done it, couldn't speak enough about how amazing it was. And so I left that summit, and this was, I think, February or March of 2019, with a commitment that I was going to do the Race Equity Institute. And I think we even had to write down like a commitment after that summit, and then I got a letter later saying, you committed to this, don't forget. So in 2019, my senior leadership team at Affinity Health Center did participate in the Racial Equity Institute down in Charleston at the YWCA. And all of us came back basically saying that was life changing. It was transformative. And we, all of us had a lot of opportunity in different types of professions to learn about the history of racism in our country, but all of us left that feeling like, wow, this is the history lesson we never got. We never learned this in our school, in our growing up. And so it was really transformative for me to think about all of the systemic and the structural racism that exists today and why it exists, and maybe to think about what to do about it. So that was 2019. I came back from that really fired up, and I talked to a couple of my board members. I talked to some city leaders. I said, let's bring this Race Equity Institute to Rock Hill. And there was a little bit of interest in that, but it just kind of fizzled. And I wrote a couple of grants to try to pay for bringing it, and I didn't get them. And so I just hit some roadblocks. But I still was kind of on my own journey. I started reading How to Be an Anti-Racist, and just trying to raise my own personal awareness of how I could be different, how I could be better, how I could be more aware. And then 2020 happened, and after the murder of George Floyd, it was very clear to me that our staff really needed something that I felt inadequate to give. and I really didn't know how to respond. And so I reached out, to some consultants who do some of this work, and Affinity ended up hiring a consultant firm to help guide me in our leadership through really how to lead with an equity lens. And that has been very helpful, just to have someone that I can call and talk to, when something comes up, or and just kind of have regular conversations throughout the year. So we've been engaged in that partnership for almost a year now. The other thing that happened is our city leader said, "Hey, I think we need to do something in our community," and reached out and said, "Didn't you tell us about this program, this race equity program?" And so, actually, a group of us formed the Community Healing Initiative, and we worked together over the last year to bring the Race Equity Institute to Rock Hill. And in February, we did that, and we had about 40 York County leaders, including our mayor, our chief of police, the sheriff of our county, very presidents of our local universities and colleges, really some powerful, influential people in our community participated in that. And it was transformative. I mean, I'm not saying it's all the answers, but I think it was eye opening for our community. And so um, I'm excited that we're kind of moving this work forward as a community, and that I've been able to be part of that process and to work with a committee, a very diverse committee, where we can have open dialogue about issues around race and how they show up in our community. I think the other thing that I will say before I hush and turn it over to Tim is that the biggest thing over the last year for me that has, I guess, come out of participating in these trainings and reading these books and working with a consultant and kind of doing my own reading is that my awareness is being raised. And I think right now I'm really focused on asking different questions in my organization and working with my senior leadership team to ask different questions. So when we have conflict, or when we are hitting, a wall with something we're trying to implement, or whatever it is that we're talking about, how is race playing into this? How is racism present? How are our biases showing up? And I think it's we got a long way to go. It's a definite journey, but I just think we're trying to ask different questions and have different conversations. And so that's what we're doing. We've had a couple of book clubs at our organization. I think we've had about 40 people participate in race focused book clubs, and that's been an opportunity for conversation. So, um, I think I'm grateful to Together SC for really putting the resources out there and replanting that seed for me a couple of years ago. And glad to be here with you all today. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Anita, and thank you for sharing that story. And good to know that summit that we had in Greenville just a few years ago really inspired you to start on that journey again. So thank you. Tim, welcome. If you don't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and sharing your journey with the group.
Yeah, so Tim Veeck, Executive Director with Habitat for Humanity of York County. As Debbie said, I've been there since 2010. And, our Habitat has kind of taken an approach of and a model of what we call neighborhood revitalization. And so inherent in that is just having to do a lot of hard work around partnering with neighborhoods who've been disenfranchised. And the hard work is not the relationship building in the neighborhoods. It's advocating for the communities that we're working alongside to make sure that their quality of life and their aspirations are heard by those folks who have the ability to make decisions that impact their community. And so I think, we've in that work, we've also had to organizationally do a lot of asking for forgiveness for how we overlook those communities for a long period of time, and then sort of reset partnerships and listen to see how we can do better to try and lift up the voices in partnership with those communities. And so I think we've been doing this 10 years and we've had some good success. And in some ways, I feel like we're just getting started with some of maybe the things that are going to be most transformative. And so I'm excited about that. I think my personal journey is one that's maybe a little bit different for a white kid who grew up around the South. And that's that I'm incredibly fortunate that I've had a significant number of African American mentors in my life from a young age, from my next door neighbors when I was in elementary school, being kind of a place of safety and refuge for me, to when I was in high school, a couple of gentlemen who just really reached out and invested themselves in me in high school and college, and then just coworkers and countless folks, board members, board chairs, lots of folks who've just invested in me over the years in ways that I would consider a gift. And so I've also had kind of maybe a little bit more of a unique opportunity to live in some pretty diverse places and be around folks from all different backgrounds. But I would say primarily spent a lot of time in relationship with folks within African American communities. I lived in Louisville, Kentucky for 7 years in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country, which was almost 50% white and Black, and had all kinds of challenges and racial dynamics going on top of the severe poverty that was in that community. And I learned a lot and saw a lot of injustice, and that sort of shaped my view as I came to Habitat here. And so I think, we may get into it more, but when I started at this at our affiliate here, I had a job that I really loved in Kentucky, but was needing to move to this area. And I remember when I had the job interview for Habitat, one of the questions I asked the board was, does your board reflect the community it serves? And there was a long pause of silence. And I waited probably a full minute. And so then I said, I'm going to take your silence as a no. And then I asked, are you willing for that to change? Because if not, please don't hire me. And the board said that they were. And so I took them at their word, but I also knew I was moving to Rock Hill, South Carolina, and words and actions can sometimes differ. So I'll just say that kudos to our board and our organization over the years, because they did provide the freedom for that to change. And I think, we haven't reached some end goal, but our board is now majority minority. We have more African American members on our board than we do white folks, we had 0 when I started. And given that our affiliate serves 90 to 95% of the families we serve are African American, and that has been the case historically, it's just, I think, is completely necessary and the right thing to do for our board representation to look more like the folks that we serve. And so that's sort of our new baseline and of how we're operating. And we'll probably get into some more conversation, but that has really helped, I would say, particularly in the past year, in terms of some of the work that we're doing. But we also have staff who I think at least one of whom is on this call, who have provided a significant source of input and feedback and just personal reflection that have been instructive for me. And I would say this, kind of in closing on this first part, I've been involved in a lot of work around racial issues and kind of trying to build racial reconciliation and improve quality of life for folks in predominantly minority communities. But the one thing that really I was convicted about this past year was, after the murder of George Floyd, I just realized, I started seeing a lot of signs about silence is complicity, and I had to look myself in the mirror and say, I've done a lot of quiet work, but I haven't used my voice and my white privilege enough. And whether I like the fact that white privilege is a thing, it's a thing. And so I needed to figure out how to put that into play to benefit other folks and to make sure voices were heard that maybe were not being heard. And so I've kind of put a statement out to our community through an email, through Habitat, and kind of committed us to that moving forward. And thankfully our board has been in strong support of that. And I'm still probably making mistakes and learning as I go, but I think I'm trying to do that more effectively. I would also say one thing that was really convicting is having lived in Louisville, and the murder of Breonna Taylor watching that play out from a distance and seeing friends of mine protest in the streets, be arrested for speaking out about the injustice, and still seeing no action has also been something that continues to play in my mind. And so I've told some folks that I've sort of switched my tact from being kind of more quiet, sort of trying to kind of cooperatively work, to realizing that sometimes you have to sort of stir the pot and speak out and advocate in ways that make people uncomfortable for change to happen. And that's sort of my learning curve right now. But I think that's where I'm trying to live more into.
Well, Tim, thanks for using your voice and speaking out and being here today and to do that, because it's sometimes it's not often easy to do the type of conversations we're talking about today. What I want to say is this is going to be sort of a Q&A. I had an opportunity to speak to these two individuals a few weeks ago and learned so much about their stories. So we came up with some questions, but I also want to hear from all of you out there. As we're going along, we have a chat box. We'd love for you to chat it up, send some questions your way or our way, and we'll just proceed. But I look forward to seeing some of your questions as well. So, I wasn't sure where I was going to go first with the question, but one of the things that impressed me so much when the three of us had our earlier conversation was talking about your boards. And I know that all nonprofits, deal with boards, obviously, and this whole issue of equity and your board and who's represented on your board. And one of the fascinating things is both of your organizations have majority minority boards. And when I heard that, I just kind of, my eyes lit up and I was like, wow, this is something that other organizations are really trying to tackle. They don't really know how to go about doing it. So I thought I'd put it back to both of you to, first of all, tell us how that comes about. And second of all, what that means to your board and the conversations that you have, because it's significantly different than when you see majority white boards or sometimes even exclusively white boards that many of us already have for our nonprofit organizations. And I think I'll go to Anita first. Would you like to tackle that question?
Sure. Yeah, so much like Tim, when I came to our organization, there was one African American board member, and everyone else was white, and most everyone were friends that had recruited friends to be on the board. And I think I would love to take the credit in getting to majority minority board members. I won't do that. I will say that we started being intentional about trying to do some different recruitment. What really made the difference for us was as a community health center, you actually have a requirement that your board match exactly the people you serve. And I think that there's a lot of, there's been a lot of gift in that requirement. So, about 7 years ago, our board, 7 or 8 years ago, our board began that recruitment process to ensure that our board looked like our patients in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender. And, I think the biggest thing besides kind of that particular goal is who's on your recruitment committee. Because if you have an all-white recruitment committee, they're going to recruit white board members. I mean, I'm not saying that's always the case, but we go to church with people who most people go to church with people who look like us. If you go to a party, you're more likely to see people who are the same skin color as the host. And again, I know these are generalizations, but if we're going to recruit a more diverse board, then you got to have a more diverse recruitment committee. And I think that's just the basic starting place. And then I think beyond that, after you've recruited a more diverse board, you got to make sure that when they become part of the board, that they are part of the board. I think you have to really avoid that tokenism, or let me get my one Black member, let me get my one Latinx member. I mean, in some boards, let me get my one female member. I serve on a board where I know I was recruited because I was a woman and it's an all male board. And I think we have to be really careful about making sure that there is an environment that you're inviting people to join where they're going to have a voice and they're going to feel included. And it's not going to be, I'm here because I'm representing my race. But I'm a part of this board. So I think it's both on the recruitment side and on the environment side inside the board that everyone has a voice, that everyone's comfortable speaking, that there is a shared power among board members, because I think one of the most detrimental things on a board is when you have an overpowering board member or two who take the power, as opposed to it really being a group effort. And if you're going to have a diverse board, you can't have that kind of dynamic, or it's not going to work. So anyway, I'm grateful our board does reflect our patient population, and but our recruitment committee is all minorities. So that has been, or I think maybe one white person, but I think that has been a huge help for us.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share from our perspective. So I think, I'm going to make a really simplistic statement and build upon that. But I think if you're going to have a diverse board, you just got to commit to it and do it. And I think I realize in some organizations that may seem like a higher hill to climb and more obstacles than and maybe scary, depending upon your particular board. You might feel like you're putting your job on the line, but I think if you're really going to be committed to the work, that's something that you got to pursue. And so, I was fortunate that when I started at our habitat, without getting into a ton of details, there had been some dysfunction and some mistrust among the board and some of the staff when I first started. And thankfully, at the time, the board chair that was in place kind of gave me some purview just to sort of really kind of lead the recruitment effort. And so I intentionally, that first round, I think we had like half our board turnover. And so that first round of new board members, I think of like the 6 we added, I believe 5 were African American, and then we had some turnover. Some of those folks had to drop off soon, and so then I had to do some evaluation around, what was related to that. Was that something going on in our organization, or was it personal? And so, but we continue to maintain the commitment to be attentive to who we were recruiting on the board, and then I think in my third year at the affiliate, second or third year, our board chair was an African American man and remained in that role for 3 years. And I think that, changed some of the perception in the community and on our board. And also for me, was just incredibly helpful. He was a good leader. So that was helpful as well. So we just continued to sort of remain attentive to that. I know every organization is different, but our board has given me a lot of, purview to help in the recruitment process. And so I'm pretty attentive to who we're inviting. And it's not just like, oh, you want to serve on the board, you're here. We lay out expectations. We have a series of conversations, individual, sometimes in a group setting. And, I also evaluate if someone's been involved or how they've been involved in the community, and to see if this is going to be a good fit. We actually used Together SC's template to approve a racial and social equity commitment for the organization this past year. And that's something that's going to be included in the board packet moving forward. So people just know this is where we're going as an organization. I will say, I do agree with what Anita is saying in terms of it does matter who you have helping recruit. We've been very fortunate. I believe this is the 4th year that we have 2 board members on our board who are prominent folks in the community. One's a former state senator, one's a retired police chief, one's white, one's black, and their voice and opinion carries a lot of weight in the community. And so when they call folks to talk about board membership, folks listen, and people also know they're on our board. And so people have been contacting them who I would not have otherwise known or had contact with. And that's how we've gotten, I think, the caliber and recognition and skill set of our board has greatly increased as a result of that. And I think this year we have more people asking to serve on our board this year than we ever have, and more people of color than we ever have. And I had a conversation with someone yesterday who contacted me about board membership, who was one of the first people I met when I came to Rock Hill, an African American man who told me politely, part of it was a time commitment, but he would not be able to commit to serving on our board, but he'd help me make connections in the community, which he has. But then he called me last week and said, I feel like God's leading me to maybe consider board membership, and it was because of the work he's seen us doing in the community. And so I just think you got to remain committed to that. And then I'll say one other thing that I don't know if it'll lead into another question, but one thing we did this year in our board, which is, I feel like this has been the most impactful year of just board engagement for me personally and for our organization. But we spent 2 whole board meetings on conversation and reflection on the aftermath of the George Floyd event and racial injustice in our local community and in the country. And what I did was I just started off those meetings, and I let our executive committee know this is what I was going to do, and was in hopes that they would be in support, which thankfully they were. But I just said, I'm going to ask our white board members to listen and not do much talking, maybe wait till the end to ask questions and just listen to our African American board members. And we did that for 2 whole board meetings. And I think to a person on our board, everyone has said that's been one of the most impactful things they've had experienced this year. And if there wasn't a commitment to that racial and social equity before, which I think there was, there is now, and it's even, I think, a more thorough commitment to that. And so I didn't know how that was going to go, but I've been humbled by the process, and I feel like also it's empowered us as an organization to move more fully into this work.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful story. This is not a question that was on the list, but I am going to go back to you and ask you this question, Tim. So you must have a really great relationship with your board chair that these things are occurring in the board meetings. I mean, tell us a little bit about that. Is this coming more from you or from your board chair? How does that work?
Yeah, and I would say this has been one of the interesting things is right now, even though our this will probably be changing the next couple of months, but even though our board was majority minority, our executive committee was not. We have one African American member on our executive committee, but our board chair was a white male who, he's been going through his own journey of understanding and, grew up in the upper Midwest in a very segregated city, and has kind of, I think, been unpacking that for himself. But I would say kudos to them because they did not shy away from that. And that I had a meeting with him yesterday, and he just talked about how powerful that was. And he also contrasted it to, like he said, it just sort of spoke to I think the maturity and the trust among the group, because he said they tried to have those same conversations in his place of work, and it unraveled and didn't go well. It wasn't under his leadership there, but it just, people felt safe, I would say. And I think it was because we've tried to cultivate, I think, a culture of respect and honesty. And, thankfully, I think we have a lot of people who are just really committed to the community and are open to hearing and learning and having their assumptions challenged. And so, but yeah, I would say, I was incredibly appreciative of the support to do that. And, I've built a friendship with him over the 3 years he's been our board chair. And I guess, I don't know, every board operates differently, but this is a plug too. Our bylaws allow someone to stay in an officer role for 3 years. Sometimes it's really hard to get momentum in a board if your chair is changing every single year, and sometimes you can't control that. But that's one thing I've been fortunate that I've had some consistency at the board chair role. So I'm not having to relearn somebody every year, and they gain some support, and we can work together in partnership. And I think the trust that we built up to this year really helped lay the groundwork for that. And I'm interested in where things go from here in terms of kind of how we continue to grow into this work. But I know that our board is committed. And that's the other thing I would say is I've had individual conversations with several of our African American board members just to check in to say, this is what I'm thinking I need to say, or this is a question I feel like I need to ask, or this is a position I think we need to take. Do you agree? And help me see what I'm not seeing as a white guy, and that feedback has been really helpful. And I do try to do that with our staff sometimes as well. And so I think it's just having to try to have a willingness to listen and to have my perspective, you know, pushed back on, uh, and 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 continue to learn. But yeah, I think it's, to me, it's been a pretty amazing thing just to see how that's played out over the past year in particular.
Well, like I say, it's so inspiring to hear both of you talk about your boards, and I know that that is a question that's on everyone's mind. So hopefully, you might want to take some questions offline if people are interested in learning a little bit more about that process, because it is something that requires a deep commitment, and the work that you've described really is very meaningful. So flipping from your board, which we all know is very important, let's talk about internal in your organization and your leadership roles in with race equity as it relates to your organization. Anita, you had said earlier in your intro that after George Floyd, of course before that as well, but after George Floyd, you really wanted to solicit input from your staff and understand where they are. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you do that and what has worked and maybe what even hasn't worked? I know that, that while we're hearing some really good things today, we know that not everything works. And, you both were really transparent in sharing with me that sometimes there are just hiccups along the way. So Anita, you want to share some of the internal about your team and how you've been engaging them?
Sure. Yeah, I think, one of the first things we did was, we tried to put out, I guess, a statement of support, an internal statement of support to our staff, and we offered kind of a time of being together to, I think we called it just silence or sharing, and back last May, and some of that went well and some of it didn't. Um, we we started a book club, and that, I think, that helped provide a safe space for some of our staff. Some were skeptical and like, I'm not sure I want to do that. What, I don't know if what I might say might come back to bite me later. I think there's some resistance to having these conversations in the workplace because of fear of retaliation, or fear of maybe relationships that that change as a result of having these kind of conversations. We had about 20 people participate in our first book club, and they decided they would like to do it again, continue on. And so, we ended up having 3 book clubs after that. We read So You Want to Talk About Race, and that book is it's very good, and it does spur a lot of dialogues. I think those were opportunities for the staff who were kind of willing to have conversations that were hard. People still hold back. I mean, I would love to say that we got to the heart of the matter across all those book clubs, but we didn't. But I think we made some progress. I know that there were some relationships that were formed across race, across role. I have one staff member who is one of our social workers, and she's an African American woman. And I know she said, we have someone in our finance team who's a white male, and social worker and finance. So even if they were the same race and gender, they tend to be very different people types. And so she said they were in the same book club, and she said going in, she was like, she had a lot of assumptions about him and who he was and how he thought and what he would say. And she said one of the biggest takeaways was that he was not who she thought he was. And, one of his biggest takeaways was, wow, our staff has been through some serious trauma. And, I think for both, it was eye-opening, that not every white person is, I mean, I'm not saying every white person probably has some racism in their heart. I'm not saying that, but not every white person is like out to get me. And I think for us white folks, it's like when you make time to listen, you learn a lot if people are willing to share. And I think sometimes as a white person, it's hard to listen because it's not necessarily what I want to hear about white people and about white culture. And, you know, and when you hear it, you start to think, oh gosh, you know, when have I done that? You know, how have I contributed to someone's experience of racism? So, you know, I think anytime you have those conversations in your staff, it can be very challenging, and there are wins, and you know, and then there are losses. You know, I think some staff, I think some of our white staff have been like, why are we even talking about this? Um, and or what's this got to do with our work? You know, what's this got to do with my day-to-day job? Or they just don't want to ask hard questions or answer hard questions, or they're afraid. I think for some of our staff of color, it's like, well, you know, what's going to change? Like if we have this conversation, what's going to be different? Or, you know, I'm tired of having this conversation, or I'm tired of hoping that you know, the world is a better place when clearly it's not. So I, you know, I think this is very hard work, and it's very tiring. I think for everybody, but especially I think for our staff of color. So I think as white people and as white leaders, we have to really be um, willing to do the work and to not give up when we get tired, because our fatigue or our being overwhelmed is nothing. It's absolutely nothing in comparison to what our sisters and brothers of color have lived their whole life going through. So, you know, I think it's just I think you got to start somewhere, and you know, whether that's at the board level or the staff level, I think you got to start with leadership, because if the leadership is not behind it, it's going to be very hard to do the work. And it's sometimes slow. And I think you have to remember that people are at different places on their journey and move at different paces. And so, you know, sometimes my leadership team says, "You drag us, Anita. You just drag us. You know, not on this issue, just across the board. And you know, like slow down. You know, let's go together on this." And so I think, you know, we have to figure that out. Um, I, you know, I think Tim mentioned too the importance of mentors. I think in doing this work, you know, if you can find those mentors who can help you, whether that's your staff members, colleagues, or if it's a board member, or if it's a community leader, I think that's super helpful. Um, I think we need to, there's a lot of information and it can be overload, but I think as white leaders, it's important, like there's a lot of information to take in and that we can learn from. And, you know, I get this daily email called Anti-Racism Daily, and it's short, it doesn't take long to read, and it has just been eye-opening, you know. They do a great job of bringing what's going on in the world right to my desk. And, you know, to be honest, I have two little kids. I don't watch the nightly news. So that's a good way for me to just to know kind of what's going on, and just to look at it from a different lens. You know, my white lens does not listen to the news the same way or read the paper the same way. So I think, you know, following leaders of color, activists on Instagram, you know, I learned things through that. So I think we have to change where we're getting our information from. If we, you know, if we're only listening to white, you know, if we're only listening to white news or reading white news or things written by white people, we're going to really miss the boat. Um, so anyway, I'm sorry, I'm just babbling on and on.
That's
I left your question, Debbie.
no, it's a great question, and I am now going to sign up for Anti-Racism Daily.
Yes,
Know
yes.
about that, and I have my daily news sources, which you're right, you know, are very influenced. What I'm reading is definitely the voice of who is ever saying it. So I am going to subscribe to that, and I hope many of you on here will. So no, thank you for sharing that. You know, I would be remiss in not getting to the community level of what's going on. I mean, this is such a rich conversation. We could talk all day, but as a result of being in Heather Hackman's cohort, you two, I think, sort of pinged each other during one of the first meetings and said, "Hey, you know, let's look at some alignments." I think that's what happened. And I guess that maybe I'll start with Tim and tell me like how this relationship evolved, and then let's talk about what is actually some of your early wins in this relationship. So go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that is true. That it was, I think, the first 10 minutes of the first session with Heather Hackman. I can't remember if I like saw Anita and said, "Hey, if there's anything that comes around in relationship to racial equity that you'd like to we could collaborate on, just let me know." And that was before we went through any of the sessions. And Anita was the only person on the call from York County besides myself. And I'd long known, as you mentioned at the beginning of the call, I've met her shortly after I started in my role, and have long kind of felt that we had sort of similar perspective in how we engage the community, and sort of felt uh, uh, just, I think, a lot of like-mindedness and our understanding of the world, and how we want to carry out our work. And so I was pleased to see her on the call. So then I think right around January timeframe, I want to say, she shot me a message back and was like, "Hey, here's an opportunity. Are you interested?" We had like 4 days to submit a grant application for something that, like, we didn't, I mean, it was basically like training dollars to train our staff together on how to collaborate on initiatives to serve the community to advance racial equity and justice. And I was like, sounds like a good one. Let's do it. And I think she and I at the time, I mean, we had visions of different things, and we weren't quite sure where it was going to go. But to make a long story short, we've been in the process of doing these trainings. I think we had one of the last ones last week, and then we'll have a report back session in 6 months. But it got together kind of a core group of her staff and a core group of our staff who do a lot of programmatic work, and some of our directors, to have a conversation about our organizations and how we could serve the community. And sort of what resulted from that was, I would say, a twofold piece. Anita and I think are definitely share a commitment to wanting to try and see how we can advance some more policy kind of things and decision making that's going on in the community, and using our voices and our shared collaboration to do that. And I would say kudos to her that she's used some of the influence she has to help move forward some of those conversations. Even in the recent past, and I think that's been helpful and will continue to reap benefits. But where our staff landed was on just a conversation around how we could programmatically collaborate, and the outworking of that was deciding to partner together to do neighborhood-based vaccination clinics in predominantly African American communities that were not located close to any of the vaccination centers that were in our community, and that we knew would pose some issues for transportation getting there. And we also, there'd been a lot of conversation about hesitancy among the African American community, rightly so, about vaccines. And so we just wanted to try and say, like, okay, how can we help in this effort? And so what we did was, because that was an equity issue, right? And it was really a life and death issue. And so Affinity had the skill set and knowledge to administer the vaccines, and Habitat had the neighborhood relationships. And so we said, okay, let's do this together. And so we just sort of went to work quickly getting the word out. As we speak, there's one happening right now in Clover, South Carolina, our second round out there, our second round of first doses, I should say. So I think I've lost count, but I'm imagining we're somewhere around the 1,400 or 1,500 people who've been vaccinated at this point, which I think is incredible. And I think this wasn't the goal, but I think it really has raised the awareness of our organizations and kind of spoke to our commitment. And it's fostered a few different things. From that, our staffs had conversation. And so now we've started offering some financial literacy courses in partnership with, I think, primarily some of the Hispanic clients that are coming through Affinity, which we've never done a great job of connecting with, just to be honest. So that's a growth area for us. We also are going to be doing a clinic, a financial literacy session in the same place we're doing the clinic today, in an outdoor setting. And Affinity is going to send someone to kind of just talk about some of the myths and concerns people have around the vaccination at the beginning of that session, just so we can kind of kill two birds with one stone in that regard. And there's other conversations that are spurring on how we can partner and collaborate long-term just to advance equity for folks. And I know, I think Anita may share about this too, but one of our board members is the president of the local HBCU. And I think after hearing about our partnership, they've reached out to both of us about this kind of shared grant opportunity that they're pursuing, that we can support them in, that's around vaccinations and creating more equity in the community. So there's just a lot of kind of on the ground work, a lot of advocacy work that's happening. And I think what it's done, it's laid a groundwork of trust and this feeling that like, okay, we're not the only ones doing this. We're not alone. There's another organization that we can do this together. And I think that's been a breath of fresh air for all of us who've been involved.
So Anita, yeah, share your perspective and what other things you see that are going on in your community.
I mean, I think Tim did a great job. It's been exciting. I think a few other wins is our staff who have been engaged. I think have been energized by it, and that's fun to watch. I think Tim and I are working on some things, but just to have our frontline staff working together and really owning this relationship and figuring out how can we refer our patients to Habitat for housing needs? And, how can Habitat refer the folks they serve to Affinity if they have healthcare needs? And then, doing this financial literacy work. And, we've talked about how housing and health are very connected. And our organizations are literally on the same street. Like we're down the street from each other and have not had that formal collaboration. So I think just realizing how connected our missions are, and how if we can figure out like Tim mentioned, if we can figure out how to advocate, we both have different connections with influential folks in our community. Our organizations have different bases of support. I think it's collectively to talk about how does affordable housing impact health outcomes in our community, and all that's tied to race and race equity. So it's just I think for us to figure out how to pull all these things together and use our voice, use the advantages that we have had to advance that equity work. And Tim and I both, and we've also talked about we're both white leaders, and there is a disadvantage to that in terms of doing this work. And so, how do we continue? How do I continue to grow? And then how do I advance leaders of color and my organization, and just kind of change how the future looks. So I think there's a lot of exciting things that's on the horizon. We're hoping to do some more racial equity institutes. Reached out to Tim. I said, "Oh, I might have another grant opportunity. Maybe your staff and our staff can do racial equity institute together." And so we're looking at that. So I think the takeaway is that sometimes we might be able to partner with people we hadn't thought about partnering with to do work we hadn't thought about doing, and it still ties back to our mission.
I love that. And I know that Tim in our conversation earlier talked about one of the things that really resonated that Dr. Heather Hackman shared with us was ally organizations. You certainly have allied yourself with each other. And I don't know if that's what you're going to speak to, Tim, but
Yeah, I was just going to say really quickly that I think, one of the important things that I don't want to forget to say is it matters how you measure what you would consider success and movement in your commitment to this work. And you're going to get pushback from people, particularly when you're having to call things out or when your actions, maybe even if you're not speaking, but your actions are calling out inequity. And so what matters is where you locate your success and what you measure. And I guess I would say that in the last 6 months in particular, I feel like we've gotten more positive feedback from the community, from the folks who are actually our mission is pointed to serving and partnering alongside, thanking us for and encouraging us in what we're doing and how we're speaking out and how we're trying to act more intentionally. And so that lets me know we're doing the right thing, not perfectly, but that we're doing the right thing. And that's where we need to continue to locate our measure of success, because folks maybe who have more power or influence, or who are getting uncomfortable by what you're doing, they may not celebrate what you're doing in the same way, but that doesn't mean you're not being successful or doing what you need to do.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that one of the things that I just hear though is your community is really stepping up and doing a lot of things collectively. And I don't know if there are any tips. I know we have a variety of people from across South Carolina, and each community deals with things differently. But are there any sort of final takeaways on how to engage the community more in this work? Either of you have a thought on that?
I would just say there are people in your community who are ready to do this work, or they're already doing it. And part of it is really just looking for it, because I wasn't looking for it before. And now it is overwhelming to me what's going on. And I think the biggest thing was, I don't think it's all new. I think I just opened my eyes and started paying attention to it. So, I think, again, expand your circle, you know, expand who you network with, talk to your staff or board members of color, talk to your or sister organizations where there are leaders of color, and ask, like, what's happening in our community that I might not be aware of, because there's some amazing things happening in our community right now that makes me really, honestly, for the first time in 15 years, be really proud of where I live.
Wow. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I would just say, I think it's important just to remain open to having a seat at the table when it's provided. There's some opportunities that I kind of accidentally sort of got involved in, and it's led to, I think, just some be engaged in community in a deeper way than we have before, and also sometimes trying to think still in an advocacy or kind of advocacy role in some community work that's going on. And so I think it's just trying to be attentive to where those opportunities open up, and then being really attentive to making sure what you're doing is representative, and particularly of things that actually do promote racial equity and justice. Because as white folks, we can easily slide back into perceptions or actions that we think are good that may have the opposite result. So you got to just remain vigilant and attentive.
Thank you. One quick question that came in the chat box. It was, do you know of other habitats or affordable housing groups that are working with primary care health centers? There's so many of them on the line today. If not, they should start.
I'll answer that real quickly. Nancy Lee, who's our state director, is on the line. So if you want to learn more about or get in contact with her, so she could get you in contact with who's in your area, Habitat for Humanity of South Carolina, go to our website and she can point you in that direction. But I would say, I know we've had conversations among executive directors about that would be a great opportunity to partner. And it is something that's happening more across the country with habitats and healthcare entities. So, and I think, the work that Nancy just put her email in the chat. So the work that our organizations are doing together with Habitat and Affinity, I think, can hopefully provide some examples of how to carry that out.
Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
and if you're interested in, connecting with your local health center, the South Carolina Primary Healthcare Association website will tell you about all the health centers across our state. And there are about 23 health center systems in our state who serve underinsured and uninsured families. So I would definitely, and not just if you're a Habitat, but whatever your organization is, I think there's, a way to collaborate in this space.
Right. Well, this has just been a fantastic conversation. I don't want it to stop because I think there's so much rich content here. What I will say to everyone is that these are available. We record these sessions and they're available, and there are people that you will probably want to share this with. You're welcome to share it. You're welcome to listen to it yourself again, but share it, because I think there's some great ideas and thoughts of how Habitat and Anita's group at Affinity have worked together, and ways that you can look for other ally organizations in your communities to do this really important work. And I see from Nancy saying in the chat box that the Habitats would love to hear from you, as I'm sure with the community health centers. So next month, we will meet again for Removing Our Binders, and have another guest speaker, Forrest Alton, who many of you may know, But today, we just really need to give a big round of applause to Tim and Anita for spending this time with us and really being very candid and sharing what's going on within their organization. So I just want to say a deep, heartfelt thank you to both of you and for your time and your dedication to this journey that you're on, and to helping all of us see, to increase our understanding of where we are in our journey. So I truly appreciate this session. Thank you to everyone for being here today. I see some good feedback coming in for the two of you. And I see some people that are just coming for the 10 o'clock, unfortunately. I see one or two people popping in.